Joss Pelletier spotted the problem the moment she looked up from the reservation sheet. The man coming through the front door of Gallagher's looked like he had just crawled out of the Algonquin backcountry, because, as it turned out, he had. Heavy canvas pack, beard that had gone entirely feral, fleece jacket, with a tear along the left shoulder that someone had attempted to patch with duct tape. His boots left faint imprints of dried mud on the polished concrete floor, and he was squinting at the restaurant's low amber lighting the way people squint when they haven't seen artificial light in some time. Gallagher's was the kind of restaurant where a reservation's wait list stretched 3 months, and the cheapest item on the tasting menu cost more than Joss's rent. It occupied the ground floor of a heritage building on King Street West in Toronto, all exposed brick and white tablecloths, and that particular hush of a room where everyone is being very quiet about how much money they have. The man did not belong here. Joss stepped away from the host stand and crossed the room with the professional speed of someone who has learned to move fast without looking like she's moving fast. She cut him off before he reached the maitre d'. "Hi there," she said, keeping her voice warm and her body positioned squarely between him and the dining room. "Are you looking for somewhere nearby? The Market Kitchen on Adelaide does a great lamb burger. Reservations aren't usually necessary on a Tuesday." The man looked at her. He had green eyes, calm and unhurried, and they didn't carry the embarrassed flicker she expected. He just seemed amused. Like this was happening exactly the way he thought it might. "I'm actually here to eat," he said. Joss kept smiling. This part required a certain diplomatic finesse she had been quietly perfecting since she started at Gallagher's 4 months ago. "We do have a very long waiting list. Tonight is fully committed, I'm afraid." "I don't have a reservation," he agreed pleasantly, "but I'd like a table for one." She hesitated. There was something off about him that she couldn't quite place. Not dangerous, just oddly settled, like a man who was entirely comfortable in his own skin regardless of the mud on his boots. That wasn't the usual energy of someone who had wandered into the wrong place by mistake. "It's really not something we can accommodate without." "Could you check?" he asked simply. "The name is Nate Gallagher." Joss turned back to the reservation system, mostly to buy herself a polite moment to think. She typed in the name, and then she stared at the screen. There was no reservation under that name, but the system had flagged it, a small red asterisk she'd never seen before, with a note that read, "Priority seating, always." She went to find Remy, the head chef, who would know what that meant. What she did not do was ask Remy why that flag existed, or who Nate Gallagher was. She was new. She didn't want to seem like she didn't know things. Remy had whispered something to the maitre d', who had then produced a table, the good corner one near the window, in approximately 45 seconds flat. Joss watched this with narrowed eyes. She had an instinct about things, and right now her instinct was saying, "Lottery winner." It was the only explanation that made sense. Someone from a small town up north, maybe, who had come into sudden money and was trying to figure out what to do with it. It happened. She'd waited on a few. They always had that same quality, genuinely surprised to find themselves somewhere expensive, not quite sure how to carry it. She felt a rush of something protective. Joss had grown up in Timmins, where her mother waitressed at a truck stop, and her grandmother kept the household budget in a spiral notebook with color-coded columns. She knew what it looked like when someone was bluffing their way through unfamiliar territory, and she knew that nobody in that situation needed the added indignity of doing it wrong in public. She slipped into the back, tore a fresh cocktail napkin from the stack, and began to write. A quick guide for newcomers to fine dining, she crossed that out. Too condescending. She tried again. Things worth knowing, friendly version. The list came quickly. Bread roll. Break with hands, butter each piece separately. Never butter the whole roll at once. It's not toast. Salad fork is the smaller fork on the outside left. Work inward with each course. If confused, look at which fork the person beside you is ignoring. Don't slurp, obviously, but also don't blow on the soup. Let it cool. Rich people wait. The wine person is the sommelier. Do not call them the wine guy. They have opinions and the confidence to act on them. If you're not sure what something on the menu is, you can ask. The staff prefer it to watching you guess. Tipping. 18% is fine, 20% is kind, anything below 15% will be discussed in the break room. She folded the napkin and tucked it into her apron. Then, because she was Joss Pelletier and she had been raised to make sure people were fed before they were educated, she grabbed the last granola bar from her bag in the staff locker room. Oat and dark chocolate, slightly squashed, and slipped it into her apron pocket. On her way to his table, she delivered it quietly alongside the menu. "Housemaid?" he asked, looking at the granola bar with genuine curiosity. "Staff room," she said honestly. "You looked like you might have missed lunch, or possibly several lunches." He looked at the granola bar for a moment longer than she expected. Something shifted in his expression, not in a dramatic way, just a small, quiet shift like a key fitting a lock. "Thank you," he said. "I genuinely needed that." There was something in the way he said it that made her feel, oddly, like he wasn't only talking about the food. Joss presented the cocktail napkin during the amuse-bouche. "I made you something," she said, unfolding it carefully. "A reference guide. No pressure, it's just nice to have a framework when you're somewhere new." Nate read "Things Worth Knowing," friendly version, with complete stillness, then he looked up. "Work inward with each course," he said, noted. "The bread thing trips up a lot of people." "Good to know." He folded the napkin and tucked it into his jacket pocket with an entirely straight face. The sommelier, a man named Gilles, who had worked alongside Nate for 6 years and once spent an afternoon with him at a wine auction in Burgundy, approached the table. He opened his mouth to recommend the 2019 Pinot they'd been saving specifically for. "Something approachable," Joss said, materializing beside Gilles with the focused energy of someone diffusing a situation. "We're looking for something accessible, not too intimidating. Do you have a house white that isn't too, a lot?" Gilles looked at her. He looked at Nate. Nate gave him a very small nod that communicated, without words, "Play along." Gilles pressed his lips together and produced a bottle of Chardonnay that was still excellent but would not require a 30-minute explanation. He poured for Nate. Nate lifted the glass by the bowl. "The stem," Joss said quietly, leaning in. "You hold a wine glass by the stem. It keeps the temperature stable and it's just the done thing." Nate relocated his hand to the stem without comment. What Joss didn't know was that he was now holding the glass incorrectly by his own habit, and correctly by the convention she was teaching him. What Nate didn't say was that he had learned to hold a wine glass by the stem approximately 2 decades ago, and had spent the last several weeks roughing it in the Canadian Shield specifically because he wanted a holiday from conventions. He took a sip. "Is it accessible?" Joss asked. "Very," he said solemnly. The tasting menu was 7 courses. By the third, Joss had developed a quiet rhythm of appearing at Nate's elbow between plates with small, whispered observations. He appeared to be taking all of them in good faith. He asked questions occasionally, genuine-seeming questions, she thought, though there was always that same gleam behind them, faintly amused, slightly warm. Between the 4th and 5th course, Remy came out of the kitchen. This was unusual. Remy only came out of the kitchen for specific people. He spotted Nate across the dining room and crossed the floor with the purposeful stride of a man who had things to report. He was already smiling, already extending his hand. Joss stepped neatly into his path. "He's adjusting," she said in a low, firm voice. "He's new to this sort of environment. Let him have a quiet meal. Treat him like any other guest, please." Remy looked at her with an expression she would later describe in her more charitable moments as a man watching a duck give directions to a cartographer. "Of course," he said after a pause that went on slightly too long. He caught Nate's eye over Joss's shoulder, made a subtle expression that conveyed both "what is happening" and "I'll come back," and retreated smoothly toward the kitchen. Joss turned back to the table, satisfied. "He was going to make a fuss," she said. "Chefs do that sometimes. They see new money and they want to impress. You don't need the pressure." "That's very considerate of you," Nate said. "I've been new places," she said simply. "It's hard enough without an audience." They ended up talking properly during the slow stretch between the 6th and 7th course. When the restaurant had thinned and Joss found herself lingering at his table longer than strictly necessary, he asked about her, not in the way people sometimes asked about servers, the performative way, but genuinely, like her answers were going somewhere. She told him about Timmins, about her grandmother's budget notebook and the dream she'd been carrying around since she was 14. A small bakery cafe in Kensington Market, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and good coffee, and the smell of cardamom and butter in the walls. Books on a shelf that people could borrow. Soup in winter, a window box with something growing in it. It needs about $200,000 to do it right, she said, which is basically the moon. What would you call it? He asked. She blinked. Nobody had ever asked her that part before. Pelletiers, she said without thinking, after my grand Maimon. He nodded like this was exactly the right answer. What about you? She asked. What's the plan now that you've come into things? He was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt like he was choosing words carefully. I think I'm still figuring out what actually matters, he said. It took a wilderness trip and a granola bar from a stranger's locker room to make me think clearly about it. Joss laughed, her specific laugh, short and surprised, like she hadn't quite expected things to be funny and was genuinely pleased when they were. Well, she said, you handled the wine glass correctly by the end. That's a start. Nate Gallagher left a generous tip, pocketed a cocktail napkin full of dining advice, and went back to a hotel 2 blocks over, one that he did not own, which had been a deliberate choice for the week. He set the granola bar wrapper on the nightstand. 3 weeks in the backcountry had done what he'd hoped, cleared his head, stripped things down, reminded him what silence felt like. But somewhere between the amuse-bouche and the 7th course, something else had shifted. He hadn't laughed like that in, he wasn't sure how long. Not at himself. Not with actual warmth at being caught in an absurdity rather than controlling it. He went to sleep smiling about the wrong fork. Joss stayed awake far too late, staring at her ceiling. Something was bothering her. The way the staff had moved around him. The way the flag appeared in the system. The way Remy had looked when she intercepted him. She picked up her phone and typed Nate Gallagher Toronto into the search bar, mostly because she needed to stop thinking about it and go to sleep. The first result was a Forbes profile. The second was a Globe and Mail feature. The third was the Wikipedia entry for Gallagher Hospitality Group. 12 restaurants across Ontario and British Columbia, flagship location at King Street West, Toronto, and there, in the second paragraph, was his name, founder, CEO, net worth estimated at $1.2 billion. Joss looked at the photo. It was a professional headshot from 2 years ago, clean-shaven and suited. She stared at it for a very long time. Then she went back to the article and reread the part that said the flagship restaurant was located at King Street West. She Googled the address. It matched exactly. No, she said to no one in her empty apartment. She thought about the cocktail napkin. She thought about telling Remy, his own head chef of 9 years, that his boss was adjusting and needed space. She thought about explaining bread rolls to the man who had personally developed the bread program at 12 restaurants. Oh no, she said quietly, to the ceiling. She arrived at work the next evening with the specific energy of someone who has made a decision and is slightly terrified of it. She found Nate at the bar. He'd come back, apparently, in clean clothes, looking considerably less like he'd emerged from a portage route, and she walked directly up to him. You own this restaurant, she said. The bar was not empty. A couple to their left paused mid-conversation. The bartender, a young man named Frederic who had excellent instincts, took 2 slow steps backward. I do, Nate said. You own all 12. I do. Joss set both hands flat on the bar and looked at the middle distance for a moment, composing herself. Then she looked directly at him. I explained the bread rolls to you, she said. Her voice was very even. I told you not to butter the whole thing at once. You did. Your restaurant has a bread program. I read about it. The sourdough has apparently won awards. Several, he confirmed. I told the sommelier you wanted something not too intimidating. She closed her eyes briefly. Gilles is certified at the Court of Master Sommeliers. He has a diploma, Nate agreed. I intercepted Remy. She was now gesturing with one hand. I told him you were adjusting. He has been your head chef for 9 years, and I told him to give you some space and treat you like any other guest. She paused. And I wrote you a guide, on a cocktail napkin, with instructions about the bread, which you have now taken, and will presumably frame as a souvenir from the most embarrassing evening of my entire professional life." A very small smile crossed his face. "I wasn't planning to frame it." "What were you planning to do with it?" He reached into his jacket and produced the folded napkin. He set it carefully on the bar between them. "I was going to give it back," he said, "and say thank you." Joss looked at the napkin. "I also wanted to tell you," he continued, "that no one has given me their last granola bar in, I genuinely can't say how long, and no one has told me to slow down and stop performing for the room and even longer." He paused, even if the delivery included some incorrect information about fork placement. "The fork instructions were not incorrect," she said, with somewhat less force than she intended. "The entree fork goes on the inside, not the outside." She opened her mouth. She closed it. "I want to apologize," he said, "for letting it go on. I should have told you sooner. I didn't because—" He stopped. "Because it was the first time in a long time that someone treated me like a person who might need a granola bar. I wasn't ready to give that up." The couple to their left had gone entirely silent. Joss looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the cocktail napkin, unfolded it, and looked at "Things Worth Knowing," friendly version, in her own handwriting, on a napkin from his restaurant, and she made a sound that was either a laugh or something very close to it. "The bread thing is still true for most people," she said. "Completely true," he agreed. "I'll add it to the staff training." She quit anyway, because she had too much pride not to, and because she couldn't face Rémi and Gilles for the foreseeable future without wanting to move provinces. She found a part-time position at a small cafe in Kensington Market, a cramped and beloved place that smelled of espresso and old paperbacks, and she started saving again. The video, someone had filmed the bar exchange from across the room, catching the full bread roll monologue, made the rounds under the headline "Toronto Server Gives Billionaire Restaurant Owner Dining Tips." An incredible slice of life. It was shared widely and affectionately, in the way Canadians share things, with a note of collective recognition, as if everyone had either been Joss or known a Joss. The comments were kind. They asked things like, "Is she okay, and where can we read the full guide, and someone give this woman a restaurant? She clearly has thoughts." Joss watched the video 3 times in the cafe bathroom on her break, and then put her phone away and made a cortado for a customer. Nate found her on a Thursday afternoon in November, when the Kensington Cafe had that particular amber glow of short daylight and a lot of candles. He came in off the street in a normal jacket, clean-shaven, and sat down at the counter. Joss looked at him. "Medium drip," she said. "Please." She poured it without another word and slid it across the counter. He wrapped both hands around the cup. "I'm in love with you," he said, in approximately the same tone one uses to order a second coffee. Joss put the cloth down. "That is a sentence I wasn't expecting today," she said. "I practiced a longer version," he said, but it kept sounding like a press release. She looked at him carefully. She had a talent for reading people. It was, in fact, the skill that had gotten her through every difficult job she'd ever had, and what she read in his face now was not performance. It was a man who was used to performing and had decided not to. "You let me lecture you about the bread roll," she said. "I did. For an entire 7-course evening. You were very thorough. You should be embarrassed." "I am," he said, "and also I haven't stopped thinking about the bakery you want to open." She went still. "Pelletier's," he said. "After your grand Mayman, mismatched chairs, books you can borrow, cardamom." She hadn't told anyone else that part. She was fairly certain she'd never said it out loud to another person before that evening at the restaurant. "I don't want your money," she said, immediately and clearly. "I know," he said. "That's actually a significant part of the problem." He looked at his coffee. "Everyone around me wants something. That's been true for a very long time, and you showed up and tried to give me things. A granola bar, advice, a guide I didn't need. All of it genuinely, just because you thought I might need it." He looked up. "I didn't know what to do with that." Joss thought about her grandmother's budget notebook, about the dream she'd been carrying around for 15 years, too specific to share but too stubborn to let go. "If I ever open that bakery," she said slowly, "it'll be because I built it, not because someone handed it to me." "Agreed," he said. "I mean it." "I know you do. That's the part I'm in love with, among other things." There was a silence. Outside, a streetcar went by. A customer at the window table asked for a refill. "You held the wine glass wrong on purpose," she said. "I moved it to where you told me. You were trying to help." She pressed her lips together. The entree fork. "You had the right idea, just inverted." "I was under pressure," she said, which was not an apology but was close. "I know," he said. "You were also the most genuinely kind person in that room." Joss picked up the cloth again and wiped a perfectly clean section of counter because she needed to do something with her hands. "I'm still a bit annoyed about the napkin," she said. "Keep it," he said, "or don't, it's yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "Medium drip is $3.50, she said finally. He put $4 on the counter and left her the 50 cents. Pelletier's opened on a Saturday in the first week of May, in a narrow space on Augusta Avenue that had been, in previous lives, a Portuguese grocery, a record shop, and a very optimistic candle boutique. The walls were exposed brick. The chairs did not match. There was a shelf of books along the back wall with a small handwritten sign that read, "Take one, leave one when you can." The window box had herbs in it. Joss had planted them herself. The bread program was her own, developed over 8 months of early mornings and a notebook not unlike her grandmother's. The cardamom rolls sold out before noon on opening day. Nate came in through the side door at 9:10, carrying 2 coffees from the place down the block, because he knew better than to show up empty-handed. And also knew better than to presume she needed help when she didn't. He found a seat at the counter and watched the room fill up with the particular early morning happiness of people who have found somewhere they already feel at home. Joss came out of the back with flour on her hands and found him sitting there, looking at the bookshelf with the expression she had learned to recognize by now. Quiet and genuinely happy, the expression of someone who had been a long time away from a room like this one. She put a cardamom roll on the counter in front of him. He looked at it. He looked up at her. "Fork," he offered. "Not in my place," she said. "Use your hands." He picked up the roll and took a bite. He chewed thoughtfully. He looked at her. "Better than the tasting menu," he said. Joss Pelletier laughed, her specific laugh, short and surprised and pleased, and went back to the kitchen, and the morning light came through the window box and landed on the mismatched chairs and the borrowed books, and Pelletier's, named for a woman who had kept a household together with a spiral notebook and a great deal of love, opened its doors for the first day of the rest of everything.